I spent weeks planning a surprise party for my husband's 40th, a night meant to celebrate the life we built together. But the moment of truth turned into a nightmare when he arrived, caught red-handed kissing his work wife, and had the audacity to call me a mistake right in front of everyone. The shock and humiliation sparked a fire within me. I vowed then and there that he'd pay for the betrayal and the pain he inflicted. For as long as I can remember, my husband always mentioned how significant turning 40 would be for him. His father had died at 39, so he held on to one wish, to live longer than his dad. As his 40th birthday approached, I began planning a surprise party to mark the milestone in a big, joyful way. I dreamed of a celebration where he'd be surrounded by his closest family and friends. I spared no effort in the planning process. I wanted everything to be perfect from the guest list to the decorations. I even invited my mother-in-law, Cheryl. Cheryl and I have always been close, and I knew how much it would mean to him to have her there. Although she lived out of town, I made sure to book a flight so she could join us on the day of the party. Everything was falling into place, and I couldn't wait to see his reaction when he entered a room filled with loved ones. On the night of his birthday, everything was set. The decorations were immaculate, and the guests waited quietly in the darkened house, their excitement barely contained. Earlier that day, I had casually mentioned over breakfast that I'd be at my parents' house that evening, hoping to lower his expectations. I wanted him to think nothing special was planned for his birthday, so the shock of the actual surprise would be even sweeter. When I heard his car pull into the driveway, my heart raced with anticipation. We all froze, listening to his footsteps and the soft jingle of his keys as he fumbled with the lock. I couldn't help but giggle, picturing him trying key after key in the dark, probably muttering in frustration. Then the door swung open, and we all leaped up shouting, "Surprise! Happy birthday!" as the lights flickered on. Instead of the joyful look I'd expected, there stood my husband, Jackson, his tie loosened, his arms wrapped around his coworker, April, locked in a kiss. In that instant, the room went silent. Just moments before, our home had been filled with happiness, but now it was thick with shock and disbelief. People gasped, staring at Jackson and April in horror. To give some background, April is a coworker of his. They've worked together for a long time. She's younger than both of us, and one of his subordinates. Over the years, I'd seen her at annual office Christmas parties when Jackson brought me along. I noticed her flirtatious behavior, especially around him. She'd even jokingly call herself his work wife. I'd brushed it off, thinking it was just her way with many of the older men at the office, and trusted Jackson completely. But now, watching Jackson kiss her in our doorway was humiliating beyond words. As he realized we were all staring, his eyes glazed over and he staggered slightly, looking disoriented and clearly drunk. He scanned the room and simply said, "Whoops," before bursting into laughter. Meanwhile, April stood awkwardly by his side, straightening her shirt and trying to wipe off lipstick from their kiss. The room remained silent, and I felt the crushing weight of embarrassment and hurt as every eye awaited my reaction. Cheryl, my mother-in-law, was the first to break the silence. She rose and demanded, "Jackson, what the hell are you doing?" Startled, Jackson turned his gaze toward her. In his dazed state, he tried to explain that he hadn't expected everyone to be there, trailing off with embarrassment. My heart pounded as I confronted him, demanding to know why he was with April in our home, kissing her on the night I had planned this surprise party to celebrate his birthday. I needed an answer, even though I feared what he might say. Jackson sighed, shook his head, and glanced around before clearing his throat as if making a business announcement. He casually stated that he had planned to break the news another day. Then, with a sneer, he added that since the surprise party had exposed him with April, he might as well reveal the truth. "April and I have been together for a few months now," he announced, pausing to glance at her as if seeking confirmation. "And I'm falling in love with her." I was utterly stunned. My hands trembled and my heart pounded as the weight of his words sank in. It felt as if he was discarding our years together like nothing. He continued, explaining that he'd tried to suppress his feelings for April for months, but this year, he decided he had to live life on his own terms. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt surreal, as though the man I'd built a life with was speaking through someone else. Then he went on about how his father's early death had prevented him from fulfilling his dreams, vowing, "I don't want to end up like him. I need to do what makes me happy before it's too late." My mouth went dry, and tears began to form. It was as if he was casting me aside, as though our shared history meant nothing. In that heated moment, something inside me snapped. Overwhelmed with fury and betrayal, I grabbed the birthday cake, the very cake I had carefully chosen for him, and hurled it at his face. The cake smashed all over his clothes. At first, everyone gasped in shock, but then some began laughing at the absurdity of it all. Our guests saw how callous Jackson was, humiliating me like that, and I guess they wanted to show their support. Jackson, understandably furious, wiped his face and, with a thick voice full of anger, yelled, "Look what you've done, you've ruined my shirt." It was almost laughable how trivial his complaint was given the gravity of the situation. Here he was, more concerned about his shirt than the public humiliation of his betrayal. Without sparing me another glance, Jackson stormed upstairs, presumably to change. Meanwhile, April stood there, unashamed, as if she owned the room. Once he was out of sight, I fixed my glare on her, marched over, grabbed her by the hair, and dragged her outside. Her shrill protests filled the air, accusing me of manhandling her, but none of the guests came to her aid, not a single person moved. Even Cheryl was furiously shouting at April, condemning her audacity to sleep with Jackson in our home, in front of all our friends. Outside, I spun her around and unleashed all the pent-up hurt. "I can't believe you slept with my husband. After all these years, after all you've seen at this party, how could you?" My words poured out like venom. But April wasn't fazed or ashamed. She scoffed, her lips curling into a smug, defiant smirk, as if I were the one in the wrong. With disdain, she declared that Jackson wanted her, and that I had no right to stand in their way, even going as far as to say he was going to leave me one day anyway. Her words cut deep, each one like a knife, forcing me to question my worth as a wife. She taunted further, saying, "You just don't understand him the way I do. You don't make him smile like I do, that's why he's leaving you. He deserves someone better." Hearing that, something inside me broke. My vision blurred, and in a single, shocking moment, I remember my hand flying through the air, connecting with her face in a resounding slap. It hurt to hear Jackson's harsh words, but it cut deeper when April turned them back on me. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the spot where I'd hit her, her cheek now an angry, burning red. Through her tears, she screamed a torrent of curse words, her voice shrill and shaking with fury. Before I could say a word, Cheryl stepped in, her tone firm and unyielding as she confronted April. "If you don't leave this property immediately, you'll get a slap from me too," she warned, her words dripping with disgust. April glared but didn't move toward Cheryl. By then, the other guests had slowly gathered outside, drawn by the chaos unfolding in our front yard. They stood in stunned silence, some whispering among themselves, others too shocked to speak. It was a scene none of them expected at our party, and I felt their judgmental eyes shifting between me and April. Then, as if on cue, Jackson reappeared. He emerged wearing a freshly changed shirt, his expression disturbingly composed despite the earlier events. A bag hung over his shoulder, and it took me a moment to realize he'd packed some of his things. When he saw April clutching her injured cheek, tears still streaming, he rushed over, wrapping an arm around her protectively, as if she were the only victim. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he yelled at me, his voice full of anger and disappointment. He looked at me like I was the one who'd crossed a line, as if I were the unforgivable villain for slapping the woman who'd been with him. Then he spat out words that shattered me once again. "I can't do this anymore. I want you out of the house when I come back from our trip. I never want to see your face again." A trip he was leaving me, breaking our marriage, and already planning a getaway with her. I stood frozen, disbelief and pain washing over me as he took April to his car, and they drove off without a second glance. I felt a deep, aching emptiness as his taillights vanished down the street. My heart felt ripped from my chest. Cheryl looked as devastated as I did. Everyone had witnessed the end of my marriage in real time. I was mortified. Cheryl, ever the rock, quickly took control of the situation. She politely asked everyone to leave, thanking them for coming and apologizing for the incident. Some guests offered awkward hugs and a few words of comfort before departing, leaving me numb as I tried to process everything that had happened. After the crowd left, Cheryl guided me to sit down and handed me a glass of water. My hands trembled, but I barely noticed. Once it was just the two of us, the tears came, uncontrollable sobs I'd held in for far too long. I hated crying in front of everyone, but alone with her, everything spilled out. The shock, humiliation, and disbelief that my husband had destroyed our marriage at his surprise birthday party in front of friends and family, all while kissing his coworker and then having the nerve to kick me out. I told Cheryl I felt completely lost, with no idea what to do, where to go, or how to rebuild my life. I'd sacrificed years in our marriage, taking care of him during his illnesses, cooking, cleaning, even giving up my career so he could have a stay-at-home wife, and now he had ripped the rug out from under me, leaving me with nothing. I was lost, both physically and emotionally, unable to imagine packing up my life and leaving the home we'd shared for years. Cheryl shook her head and reminded me of something I'd forgotten. The house Jackson and I lived in wasn't really ours. It belonged to my late husband, a home filled with cherished memories. I allowed you two to live here so you could start a family and build a life together. At the time, it felt like a gift, a fresh start filled with love and support. But now, everything's shattered, and what Jackson did wasn't just betrayal. It was a violation of the trust one placed in you. Her voice grew heavy with sorrow. After what my son did to you, I'm ashamed to have raised such a monster. She wrapped her arms around me in a comforting embrace that also felt like a promise. Looking me straight in the eyes, she declared, "This is my house, and I decide who lives here. I'm choosing you." Her words were a lifeline, giving me a sense of control in a situation that had spiraled out of control. She continued, firmly stating that Jackson needed to learn that destroying a marriage and walking away wouldn't be without consequences. Then she added with a smile, even amidst the chaos, "There's no way I'm letting April move in here with my son or ruin my family home." Cheryl's protectiveness was something I hadn't expected. I thought she'd stand by her son. Instead, she was looking out for me. Jackson might have believed he could simply walk out of our marriage and into another woman's arms, but Cheryl and I were determined to show him that life wasn't that simple. Her words gave me relief, like a heavy burden had been lifted, and her support empowered me to take control. Over the weekend, I signed a proper rental agreement with her, making everything official. I wanted something concrete to stop Jackson from ever kicking me out again. That same weekend, I carefully packed all of Jackson's things. It was strangely therapeutic, boxing up the remnants of the life we'd shared, and I arranged them neatly on the porch for him to pick up when he returned from his trip. A week later, I noticed his car pull into the driveway. I'd already prepared by installing security cameras outside, just in case things went sideways, and changing the locks. There was no way I was letting him barge back in and disrupt my life. Sure enough, when he tried his key, nothing happened. Frustration twisted his face as he fumbled with the lock, eventually realizing he was locked out. He began banging on the door, his fists hitting the wood like a relentless drum. "Open the door," he yelled, his voice thick with anger. I watched him through the camera, strangely calm. I wasn't going to let him back in, not after everything that had happened. Instead of opening the door, I spoke to him through the intercom in a casual tone. "What are you doing here, Jackson?" I asked, almost bored. His reply was immediate and furious. He started yelling, accusing me of overstaying my welcome, claiming I'd had more than enough time to pack my things and leave. His voice dripped with contempt as he ranted about how tired he was of me, how he couldn't stand my so-called neediness and desperation by staying here after ending our marriage in front of everyone. He insisted he only wanted the divorce and for me to vanish from his life. Then his eyes fell on the boxes outside. For a moment, he went silent, clearly not realizing they were his things. He glared at the boxes and then back at the door, shaking his head as if this were some absurd joke. But it wasn't, he knew it all too well. "You think you can just toss out my things like that? You think you're going to get away with this?" he bellowed, stomping up to the door again and pounding it with renewed aggression. His fist slammed against the wood as he shouted, "You have no right to do this. I'll take you to court if I have to. You can't just kick me out of my own house." I continued watching him through the camera as he vented, pacing angrily on the porch. It was almost ironic how he still believed he was in control of the situation. I leaned in toward the intercom, my voice calm as I explained that this wasn't his house, but his mom's. I had signed a rental agreement with Cheryl, making the place legally mine, and pointed out that he was the one trespassing. After a brief pause to let him understand, I continued that if he wanted to take the matter to court, he was welcome to try, but I doubted he had a case. I ordered him to grab his things and leave immediately or I'd call the police. Watching Jackson through the camera, I saw confusion written all over his face, as if he couldn't quite process my words. He looked almost pathetic as he froze for a moment, only for his confusion to quickly turn into fury. He screamed at the door and, in a burst of movement, snatched his phone. I knew he was calling his mother, hoping she'd come to his rescue, but I was certain Cheryl wouldn't do that. She'd tell him exactly what I had. This wasn't his house anymore, and he had to face the consequences of his actions. I watched him pace furiously on the porch, knocking over boxes and muttering curses. It was clear that his conversation with Cheryl wasn't going his way. His frustration reached a boiling point as he kicked over one of the boxes I'd carefully packed, sending his belongings scattering all over the porch. I could hear him shouting profanities at the door, calling me a thief and accusing me of stealing his house. "I'm going to make you pay for this," he kept repeating. I could have fired back, But I knew it was pointless. He might try dragging this to court, but we both knew he had no leg to stand on. I had done everything by the book, and there was no way he could claim I'd wronged him, especially since he was the one who broke our marriage vows and betrayed me in the worst possible way. After what felt like an hour of his raging outside, his anger finally subsided. He looked defeated, his shoulders slumping as the reality hit him. He was beaten. With no other option, Jackson began loading his boxes into his car. I watched as he shoved his last things into the trunk, slammed it shut, and drove away. Since that day, I've received multiple voicemails from both Jackson and April, all filled with bitterness. April, in particular, seems to revel in calling me a witch for kicking Jackson out, insisting that they both wanted to start fresh in that home and that I stole their dream. Meanwhile, Jackson has been living in a motel and, through his messages, claimed misery over being kicked out. For clarity, Jackson isn't living with April because she shares a place with 2 roommates, and her strict landlord won't allow him to move in. It's almost laughable. If they were truly committed, April should break her lease and find somewhere they can truly be together. But honestly, it's no longer my problem. My focus now is on making sure Jackson pays for what he did. I've already filed for divorce and am ready to fight for a hefty alimony. He might have thought he could leave our marriage without consequences, but actions have repercussions, especially when you betray someone who's been nothing but loyal. If he wants a life with April, fine, but he'll have to help me rebuild the life he wrecked, whether he likes it or not. 2 months later, I finally took the advice I'd received and sent an email to Jackson's company about his ongoing affair with April. I knew airing our dirty laundry wouldn't undo his betrayal, but it was necessary for the sake of his other colleagues. In the email, I detailed everything Jackson had confessed about their affair, even mentioning specific incidents like April flirting with older men at office parties. I wanted to show that their relationship wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a violation of workplace ethics. To my surprise, after a week of silence, I began hearing from some of Jackson's coworkers, who had also become friends over the years. They told me that HR had launched a full investigation. I hadn't expected my email to be taken seriously, but word had spread about his favoritism toward April, a practice that had long raised eyebrows and caused discontent within the office. My detailed account, along with complaints from other employees, forced the company to investigate. What started as a private matter quickly turned professional, and that changed everything. Days later, friends informed me that Jackson had been fired as a result of the investigation. I could hardly contain my satisfaction at seeing him lose the privileges he'd taken for granted while engaging in the affair. As for April, I'm not sure if she'll face the same fate. There are whispers that HR is still looking into her role, though nothing definitive has emerged yet. Part of me hopes she gets consequences too, but I know it's out of my hands now. For anyone wondering about my alimony situation, rest assured I'm in a strong position. Over the years, Jackson earned a substantial income, yet he rarely spent any of it on us. We never went on vacations, had few date nights, and he rarely bought me anything. In hindsight, the red flags were always there. I just didn't want to see them. Now, my focus is solely on finalizing the divorce and ensuring I get what I deserve. I won't settle for less than what's fair. With his job loss and everything that's unfolded, I feel like I'm on the brink of a fresh start and ready to move forward. 7 months later, I've been divorced for a while now and have started dating again. Jackson held a grudge throughout the divorce proceedings, blaming me for his job loss, but there was nothing he could do. Multiple witnesses saw him kissing April at his surprise party and even heard him admit to the affair. In the end, I didn't receive a massive settlement during the alimony negotiations, but I got enough to start rebuilding my life. The first thing I did after the divorce was take a solo vacation, lounging on the beach all day, sipping cocktails. I'm now working part-time at a friend's boutique and plan to apply for full-time positions soon. Cheryl and I remain close. She's been a steadfast support through this ordeal, giving me the space I needed to heal. As for Jackson and April, they're still together. Although April was never fired, I've heard that her coworkers no longer trust her. Most have distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with someone at the center of such a huge company scandal. Life has a way of forcing you to reckon with your past, and after the chaos settled, I found myself standing at the threshold of a new beginning. The sting of betrayal still lingered like a shadow, but each day I felt the weight of anger and hurt slowly melting away into something like resolve. I spent my mornings sipping coffee on my small, sunlit balcony, reflecting on every painful detail and every lesson learned. I realized that, even though Jackson's actions had torn apart the life I once knew, they had also given me the courage to rebuild a future that was entirely my own. I began taking small risks that once seemed impossible, like enrolling in night classes and exploring creative outlets I'd long ignored. I painted, wrote, and even ventured to volunteer at a community center where the quiet kindness of strangers helped stitch together the frayed edges of my spirit. Every brushstroke on a canvas or a written word in a journal was a silent victory over the past, each one affirming that my life was still mine to direct. I understood that healing wasn't a linear path. There were days when memories cut deep and nights when silence spoke volumes. But even in those moments, I found comfort in knowing that every tear had watered the seeds of resilience. Meanwhile, the fallout of Jackson's choices rippled far beyond our shattered marriage. The once tight-knit circles at his company had splintered, and whispers of accountability became a low hum in every conversation. April, too, was struggling under the weight of her decisions. I kept my distance, not out of spite, but because I recognized that holding on to anger would only anchor me to the bitterness of the past. I observed from afar as the office slowly distanced itself from the scandal, a daily reminder that actions, both good and bad, have consequences. Even as Jackson's personal and professional life crumbled, I maintained a steady focus on myself, choosing to let the natural course of justice unfold without becoming entangled in further drama. My relationship with Cheryl deepened as we discovered that our shared history had paved the way for a stronger, more honest connection. Together, we navigated the stormy aftermath, her unwavering support and gentle humor lighting the way when darkness seemed to press in. With her encouragement, I began to explore new dreams, a small business idea that had hovered at the back of my mind for years. The prospect of turning passion into purpose was exhilarating, a tangible sign that my future held promise far beyond the confines of past betrayal. As the months turned to a year, I gradually came to understand that the end of one chapter was merely the beginning of another. I learned to trust again, not necessarily in people, but in my own ability to persevere and grow. I still carried the scars of my experience, but they had become badges of honor, symbols of a hard-won transformation. Every challenge faced and every battle fought had forged a stronger, wiser version of myself. I recognized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the past. It was about freeing myself from the chains of what once was. Now, as I stand firmly on the brink of a life rebuilt on my own terms, I feel a profound sense of gratitude for every trial that led me here. I'm aware that the scars may never fully disappear, but they remind me of the power within me to overcome and thrive. In letting go of the bitterness, I discovered that the best revenge is living well, creating a life filled with hope, passion, and the kind of joy that can only come from truly embracing your worth. And so, with a heart that has been both shattered and mended, I step forward into a future that is mine alone, knowing that every ending paves the way for a new beginning.